Well, hopefully someone else will join, but I guess we can start it off, so we make sure we stay in time and we have time for in-depth discussions on, because we're gonna throw a lot today probably on the table, or as much as we can, and hopefully we're all gonna be make the most that we are a small group to have a rich discussion, including everybody. So welcome to our second session on measuring impact of social ventures. As Julia knows, and I introduced already to Sabrina, we are joined by Kirsten and Pasquale and Mahe, all three experienced with evaluation from different perspectives, but we will see more later on. So again, this is us and quite a large team for this collaborative session. And this is the agenda for today. We're gonna start with a quick check-in to ask you, how did you process the information from last session? And in the case of Sabrina, as I know she went through the slides, if she has any additional things that she wants to ask, for example, to the group. Then we will dive into the three topics of today, which are challenges that are brought in by the experience of Pasquale and Mahe in developing a tool for measuring impact of civic labs. So they found these three main challenges: making evaluation a tool for design, measuring the intangible, and making theory of change more approachable. And we will do this through a fishbowl conversation that I will explain later how it works. So I would say first the check-in. Maybe I can ask directly Julia, as you are the only one now that also attended last time, and then I will ask also Sabrina, how did you process the information from last session in these past weeks?
So since also last week I told you that it was not completely new, the topic, there is something that I knew about. It was like partially a confirmation of certain things that were there, and partially was a bit of a relief, because somehow I have the feeling that when you are evaluating things, and especially when it comes to find the right indicators, it's not easy, and I'm happy to hear that is a shared challenge that we have. So I think that is only through communication and sharing this with others that we can get better at it. And especially like the idea of this qualitative interview, that they can actually change in time and add specific part for each one of the challenge, and it doesn't need to be fixed from the beginning until the end, was a thing that I was not thinking it was possible. So it's still working in my mind, but I guess that I will approach this challenge with more ease within myself.
Great. And yeah, I was curious to know also from Sabrina if you had any, how did you find this slide from Kirsten's presentation? And if you had any questions on those before we start with the rest of the session. I don't hear you, Sabrina.
I think that the slide were very clear. So I think at the moment I haven't a question.
Okay, then great job, Kirsten, on the presentation. We go ahead and I'll explain to you.
Slide. It was the presentation for slide is correct. I saw a presentation of 4 slides.
Yeah. Okay. It was quite a concise one, because we left quite some space for later for the discussion, and I will put together the recordings if possible and share everything after this session.
So very clear, very interesting. Thank you, Kirsten.
I explain you really shortly what is the fishbowl discussion that we want to have today. So it's pretty simple. As you know, as I showed you, we have 3 topics, and that were brought in as challenges from Pasquale and Mahe's experience. What we would like to do is to let them basically kick off the conversation on each of them, explaining a bit what they mean with them, and have some reactions from Kirsten. And afterwards, immediately have your thoughts and reaction from your experience on what's the discussion, and to see basically your perspective on it, and whether we even diverge and touch upon other things. We will try to cover all of them in the time that we have. We should be super fine with timing. So today it's going to be hopefully a really insightful and rich discussion. I will share with you this Miro board in a second, right after I stop sharing my screen. But what you see here is that we have 3 circles with these topics. We will start from the top with making evaluation a tool for design, and we will go through the other 2. In the circles, you can also find tools and materials that what Kirsten and the guys from Civimetro decided to share, that they either used or, well, they'll talk about it better themselves later, that you can check with references and all. So I guess this is it for this part. As I said, I will share with you now the link. Which is in the chat. And I would say I will share again the screen so that everybody can see Miro board, but I will, as I say, pass the ball to Pascual, Mahe, and Kirsten.
Okay. Well, first of all, just to try to put in context the project Civimetro, and to put in context also the experience of Mahe and me, is that Mahe and me, we are not experts in evaluation, in which we can say our expertise or our field is civic innovation. And our project involves evaluation because we are trying to evaluate, in fact, civic innovation process or civic innovation projects. So the project starts trying to build a guide or a system of evaluation of civic labs. And we were selected in the second open call of Designscapes, and we had there an experience with trying to build a prototype. And then we were selected in the third open call, where we have scaled the project. And the thing here for this topic, like making evaluation a tool for design, is that what we learn in this process of first trying to build a prototype, and then afterwards the second experience in the scale, we work with 2 different civic labs. In the first one, we were working with Media Lab Prado, which is a civic lab in Madrid. And the second experience, we were working with Media Lab Tabacalera, which is another civic lab in Donosti, in San Sebastian, in the north of Spain. So in the first case, with Media Lab Prado in Madrid, we start thinking about the system of evaluation. And the first thing that we thought, it was about trying to build indicators, how to build indicators for civic labs. And what we found after is that, I mean, it didn't work. And it didn't work because of a lot of reasons, but one of them, it was that the initiative, the civic lab, it was not defined, it was not designed to be evaluated, we can say. The objectives that they had, it was like not well defined. There were, it was objectives with no clear population, with no clear aim, and so on and so forth. So when we try to connect, like our system of evaluation and our indicators with these goals that are not clear, it doesn't work. So for the second experience, what we did, we said, okay, we need to have specific tools for these first steps of the evaluation system. We have to know better the context of the Civic Lab that we want to evaluate. And we also need to help the Civic Lab to define better objectives, to have the objectives like well defined, like they have clear the population, they have clear their goals, and so on. So, for example, for that case, for the goals, I'm trying to, okay, I'm going here in middle. For example, this first tool that we search here, I will bring you here. I can. Okay, this one is in Spanish, sorry, because we don't have it translated, but we will have, we hope, as soon as possible. But the thing is that for this, what we did was to try to build like a structure for the objectives. So all the objectives needs to have a verb, needs to have a population, and needs to have an aspect that you want to improve. So with these three, if an objective doesn't have these three aspects, it's not a good objective. So we start to, with Media Tabacalera, we start to, in this point, we start to, okay, which are your objectives and how are defined? So we are going to work on that and we are going to redefine that. Also, we have try to know very deeply how the context of the Civic Lab works, which are the stakeholders, which are the people that are working there, which are the people that are getting involved by the activities of the Civic Lab. I mean, a lot of things that we did to try to understand better the context. And the thing here is that we, at the end, with Media Lab Tabacalera, what we saw is that all these tools that we defined for the first steps of our evaluation system, it was not just useful for us as evaluators, it was also really useful for the people who coordinate the Civic Lab, for the people who coordinate the initiative, because it was like they have to rethink and redesign their own initiative. And they have to redefine the initiative and redesign it to be evaluated. So in this process, they have to put in crisis a lot of things that they think that they know and they don't know it. So it's like we saw like all these first steps of system evaluation, even, I mean, way before to start to think about measuring anything, even before to start to think about indicators, like all these tools are like one of the most valuable things that we have in our system of evaluation. Just with this, without making any measuring, like the Civic Lab received like a lot of feedback and recommendations that they can use in their own Civic Lab to improve the Civic Lab. So the conclusion there was like, okay, it was like we saw very clearly that evaluation, I mean, it's a very, we can say like a silly thing that's like we all know that, but we saw it like very clearly, like evaluation is not just to evaluate, it's not just to measure, it's not just to try to make a data collection. Like evaluation start from the beginning, and all these things are also evaluation. Like the system, like the evaluation system needs to help you to redefine your initiative, to redesign your initiative, and if you do that, you are like evaluating it in the whole process. So that's it. I don't know if Christine or Maje wants to.
I wanted to add something, and we found also that sometimes they don't speak with the other person, so they have their own idea what is the Civic Lab or what they want to do, but they don't share this idea with the another colleagues. And it was very interesting that they had to make explicit to say why they want to evaluate. I think it was a.
I think that's really interesting. All of the things that you say, because they're sort of classic evaluation problems. Because and an interesting, some immediate association of me to that is kind of that experience is, I'm finding this, and I'm coming sort of, for people who don't know me, from sort of the other direction to Pasquale and Mache. So I'm not a designer, but I'm an evaluator, so I work across a whole range of fields, and it's quite common for people to have that dilemma of doing something, but maybe not necessarily having thought about maybe the context in which they're working, or kind of the vision for the change that they're looking to achieve. Because often these things, when we're practitioners, I always thought in my practice and in the encounters that I've had, often these things are sort of what we would call tacit knowledge. I don't know if that's a word that resonates, but it's kind of knowledge that we're not necessarily, that we haven't necessarily formalized or made explicit, but it's knowledge that we gained through our professional experience. And so often we don't even think about maybe making it explicit and articulating to others why we're doing particular things in a particular way in order to achieve change. We've got sort of lots of insights, lots of sort of feedback from people that makes us believe that what we're going to do is going to produce the change. But yes, when we are evaluating, I think one of the key, and that leads me then to, I guess, a question that I wanted to bounce back to everybody almost. I think one of the key characteristics or features of evaluation is that we are looking, that we are having some kind of systematic way of collecting data and making those processes of data collection and analysis explicit and transparent. And we're pegging the process of data collection and analysis onto the questions that we want our evaluation to answer. And in that process of making things explicit, we are gaining our knowledge, and it can communicate our learning and our evidence about why things have changed. One thing that struck me, being sort of relatively new to the world of design, is that certainly from an outside perspective, it always struck me that designers are perhaps quite uniquely placed to think in an evaluative way and work with data. Because so when we think about evaluation, there's sort of different reasons or different purposes for why we would want to do an evaluation. Yeah? So we can do evaluation, absolutely, as Pasquale, I think you alluded to or spoke to, which is what people are thinking intuitively often when we think about evaluation, to demonstrate effectiveness, so demonstrate that we've achieved a result, an outcome, an impact from our work. So that's absolutely one of the functions of evaluation. And often we do this for a range of purposes, and it would be quite useful to talk about that maybe as well if we've got time. But often that's to do with sort of external audiences, right? So we're looking, where does our next funding come from, and what evidence do we need that what we're doing makes a change, and that would convince people to buy our product or give us a grant to continue the exploration. But there are other reasons for evaluating as well. And one of the reasons, for instance, is learning. So we can use evaluation data, and this we would call this process evaluation, rather than the first one, which is an outcome or impact evaluation. And one of the reasons for process evaluation, that people are doing process evaluations, is that they want to learn from the experience of implementing a program or project or something. And that involves sort of collecting data about what it is we're doing, sort of as we go along in the moment. And it struck me that there is a link, but that might be being naive. So I think it would be really interesting to have that conversation. It struck me that there is a link with that iterative way in which designers work, which in my understanding does involve kind of, through the engagement with users and stakeholders, collecting data about what works, how we need to tweak, how we need to iterate next. And through this generate some learning about how well something, a product or a process that we're working on is developing. So that's my observation and reflection and question. And so what I'm inviting, I guess, is a sort of reflection back from you guys, whether that's correct. And then also what are some of the challenges? I mean, what are some of the challenges kind of more globally, in addition to maybe Pascal, to what you were saying about thinking in an evaluative way from a sort of design perspective? And I think that's an open, so Julia and Sabrina, and I think that we can open that conversation, but Pasquale and Maja, if you wanted to, Alberto and Alicia, I think we might as well have the dialogue between the whole group, right?
Yeah, actually on this point, I was wondering about this project, if the Civic Lab were actually looking for an internal evaluation of the impact that they were producing for their own sake, like to improve internal processes, or if it was because they needed to transmit to another external entity some results. So it was not really clear for me this scope of doing the evaluation for them.
Well, I think that's interesting, because in the first case with Medellín Prado Madrid was about trying to communicate outside. And with the second case with Media Lab Tabacalera was how to learn better their internal processes. So, and that also changed a lot how we, I mean, of course, our project Civimetro, it was not the same in the first case. We were like prototyping the project, and in the second case, we already have like a better structure of the project. But anyway, it was that change of perspective from the Civic Lab changes a lot also how we approach the evaluation. And I mean, it was a mix of things, but in the first case, Medellín Prado, they want to communicate outside. And I mean, honestly, it was a mess. It was a mess because, well, first of all, we made a mistake trying to evaluate something that already happened, and that they were it wasn't thought to be evaluated. So it was so hard to trying to get information, data, or I mean valuable data that we would use to make an honest or correct evaluation. And at the same time, it was like this pressure to try to build something to communicate outside, and it was like, I mean, it didn't work. It didn't work a lot. I mean, and for Media Tabacalera, it was completely the opposite. I mean, from our approach, like we were more clear that, okay, we need to have, I mean, we need to evaluate something that is going to happen. So what we need to do is to try to design the evaluation system with them so they can implement the evaluation afterwards. And also from their approach, it was also completely different, because they were like, okay, we don't have the need to communicate anything outside. We just want to do this because we want to. I mean, it's a good moment for us, because also they were in a moment in where they were merging two programs in one. So they were like designing and defining this new program, and it was like, okay, maybe this could be useful for us to try to define this new program. And I mean, their approach was completely different. So it was so much better in this case. So it was like a confirmation for us. Okay, this is how a good evaluation should be approached. Like it should be from the beginning, and it should be trying to, as I was saying, you need to design your initiative to be evaluated. I mean, otherwise, it's at the end, you can make an evaluation of an initiative that you already have done, and the results are going to be what you want it to be. You can do it. I mean, you can have an evaluation that says whatever you want to say, if you do it afterwards. So yeah, I think that's like the learnings.
Yeah, it's really interesting what you're saying, because in my very limited experience with tools of evaluation, also coming from design thinking perspective, so when you go through processes and you evaluate that, I would say that it's very different when you do an evaluation, internal one, for your purposes, because I think as service designer, we see the benefit of it, but at the same time, you really need to do it in some sort of brutal way that sometimes you don't want to show to external partners. So even understanding that some conversation that can happen behind closed doors when you're talking about the project will not be the same that you give to potential investors or others, is actually something that we should somehow emphasize, because I understand that in a perfect and maybe utopian world, everything is so open and transparent, but I don't think that in reality of things is working this way. And being open in saying that they cannot be the same ways in which we are evaluating things if we are doing it for an external purpose or an internal purpose, I would say that is intellectually fair to put at ease all the people that are working on it.
Yeah, I think that's right. Today. I think there's a kind of.
I think this is more connected with like, yes. No, please.
I think there's I think you're right, and sometimes even using evaluation for internal learning can be quite challenging to people, depending on how it's done, and it might be less so for designers who are used to be working much more iteratively, but certainly in some fields that I've worked with, and to be honest, I've experienced it myself with colleagues evaluating a project that I've run. I felt like very nervous actually to kind of receive the report. So it can be quite difficult to sort of implement that ethos of learning, but that is a very strong, and that certainly we see as a very strong value very strong part of evaluation. And yes, I think the link often between evaluating for the purpose of learning and then looking at outcomes, again, often they dovetail they're kind of linked together quite neatly, because if you evaluate as you implement, and so theory of change, and we talk about that a bit later, but what we talked about last year is a really great tool to combine those two. So learning from our implementation then helps us understand the outcomes that we've achieved, which is how it can help with the reporting to funders, or sort of how to present project results to external audiences, because we might start off at the beginning thinking, oh, okay, so this tool or this process or whatever, this is absolutely going to change the world, and it's going to revolutionize how we train young people, in entrepreneurship in your case, or how we, I don't know, or in my case, that was the project I was running as well, using a game. It's going to absolutely, revolutionize everybody's life, and we absolutely believe and are committed to doing that. And then we're finding actually maybe our successes are a bit more modest, and some of the things that we thought we would achieve haven't quite worked. And actually, if we have then used a sort of process evaluation to collect sort of systematic data around some of the key questions that we may be less certain about, or even that we believe are most certain about, we've got a way of explaining why some of why we achieved results, the good ones, and then maybe the ones that were a little bit different. And to your question from last week, kind of what were maybe some of the surprises and the unexpected outcomes, and why did they come about? So it's very rare. Well, in an ideal world, I would say we would combine both, but that can also be a little bit challenging for time and logistics and so on. But I'm still interested. Why do people want to evaluate sort of design-enabled innovations? What's the motivation? Like just from you guys in the room.
I think for me, evaluating how we deal with the project also internally can help us to lead the next project in a better way. So like reiterating certain process, see what is going good, what is going bad. Unfortunately, in the reality, we don't often do that. And because we don't have time. And the moment in which we do that is in the time of crisis, when we have to reinvent certain things because it's so clear that something went wrong, that then you're questioning, let's go back and see where we failed. And I think already in the design, like atmosphere bubble, it's already good enough that we somehow have the consideration of failure as a positive thing or a learning tool, because I don't think that in other industries is the same. And actually you fail and it's an end point and you usually bring everything, throw it away and start again. So at least in our bubble, we are still considering that there is something to learn in there. On a personal level, it's not that easy, I would say. But unfortunately, we are the first one advocating for actually being mindful and reiterate the process multiple times to actually see what you can improve. But we are the first one not doing it maybe for internal purposes.
So you're doing it for, so when you say you're not doing it for internal,
doing it in a proper way, but it, sorry, we have a bit of delay. I'm so sorry. Continue.
No, sorry. I was just struck by you saying, and sorry, I thought you'd paused, but I realized that there is a delay in the line. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you.
No,
off.
I was, I don't know when I actually stopped, but I was saying that maybe we don't do it for internal purposes because we always think that we are too busy for the next project. And that's a problem that we often face. And I didn't meet anyone that doesn't have this challenge so far.
Yep.
And that's kind of just because just to educate me, I think. So the iteration as part of the design process. So how is that learning from evaluation for internal purposes different from the sort of iteration, the learning from the iterations that you're doing as part of a design process, if that makes sense, is a question.
Yes, so sometimes within the design of the process of a project, we have certain point of forced iteration in which there is a test. We're going to test it, see how it responds, and then we do modification. So when it's scheduled in this way, we are totally following the rules. When there is something between this part of forced iteration in which something goes wrong or whatever, we try to fix it as we go without actually reflecting on it in a systemic way.
I see. Okay, thank you. That's very interesting.
Okay, Alberto was saying to jump into the next bubble. Just before that, and because it was a couple of things that, and I think is good also to make the link about what Julia, you were saying of, well, first of all, how much open you can make the evaluation, and also about how to redefine failure as a good thing. I think in this case it's also regarding this thing of trying to understand evaluation as a helpful tool for designing, because also linked with this issue of that we usually don't evaluate because we are too busy, and we think about evaluation as another layer that we have to put on all the things that we have to do. So if we understand evaluation as a thing that is going to help us to define and to design the process, then it changes. You don't understand it as a thing that you have to put above all the tasks that you have to develop. And I think also this about how much open needs to be this. With Civimetro, after Media Lab Tabacalera, we already start another experience with another project of Civic innovation process in Fuerteventura, in Canary Island. This is a two-year project. And I think it's important to say that for Civimetro, the system of the evaluation have 7 steps, and we don't test the 7 steps yet. We just test the first four steps. So we hope that with this two-year process, we can have the opportunity to test the 7 steps. But the thing is that we start with this initiative. We start from the beginning, trying to define the objectives, and trying to understand the context, trying to define the population, and so on. And the project is communicating the evaluation process right now. I mean, it's communicating that they are changing the objectives, they are making changes, that they are understanding that they found something that they were doing wrong, that they are communicating this. And I think this is also important because when you start evaluating from the beginning, then you have tools to put in context your failures. If you do it afterwards, if you see a failure, you don't have the tools to put that failure in context. So then you go like, okay, we were in an experimental process, and okay, it happens. I mean, we have this failure, but you don't have the tools to say why this failure happened, and I mean, how much away of your objectives this failure were. I mean, you don't have the tools to try to build a narrative on this failure. If you start to evaluate from the beginning, I think you can have more tools to do that, and then you can communicate these failures in another approach. That you can communicate this failure with a narrative that you are building from the beginning. So yeah, I don't know, something that comes to my mind regarding this.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. And I think I do think there's something about social change interventions, be they design-led and otherwise, that creates a particular benefit and value for evaluation, because actually often when we are working with people in sort of quite complex situations, it's very difficult to make like straightforward assumptions about we do X and then as a result Y happens. But actually there's kind of a lot of stuff that happens, and a lot of people and a lot of things from the context intervene to support or to check or to negate the change that we're looking to make. So actually having evaluation as a sort of tool to collect systematic data does indeed help us tell that story about change in those social systems in which we're working in a much better and with much more confidence. I think often with people, sort of in other contexts, often it's about kind of having just sort of feeling a degree of confidence, I guess, or certainty about our achievements and results, and expanding them and communicating them. And I think when we have transparent and systematic tools for data collection analysis, then it just offers that security, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Okay, if it's okay, I will jump to the next bubble. Okay, measuring the intangibles. For this, what we wanted to share is how we, well, one of the challenges that we faced at the beginning was that we were trying to build a system to evaluate a civic innovation process, or a civic labs in this case, like spaces in which civic innovation processes take place. So what we found is that also before to start to define indicators and tools for data collection and so on, we need to define, we need to conceptualize what we wanted to evaluate. So we need to conceptualize civic innovation. In other words, it was like trying to define what makes these spaces unique. we were talking about this before, and we think this is this also could help to for other initiatives in Civic in Designscapes regarding that they all are like initiatives of social innovation, or I mean are very linked of a civic innovation approach. And sometimes what we found is that it's really hard to try to define or communicate what makes this initiative unique. So and also we want to avoid the problem of being evaluated by other standards that doesn't fit with an experimental process and like service design, social innovation, civic innovation. So we made this exercise of trying to build which are the concepts that define a civic innovation process, and we defined these 7 dimensions. And it was like inclusive community, accountability, experimental dynamics, distributed management. I don't remember the other was like open design. It was like these 7 dimensions that that we defined with these aspects, which are you can see here in this document. So, for example, for distributed management, that could be like a concept that not all the people could understand what are we meaning by that. So we defined each concept with these 3 or 4 aspects. So for example, distributed management, promote rotation of defined job roles, ensuring that there is alternation between visible and invisible tasks and productive and reproductive ones. So we made this, and we start to build the whole evaluation system from these 7 dimensions. So we have these 7 dimensions of evaluation, and then after we can start to think about indicators and link these indicators to this specific dimension, which are unique in civic innovation process. So yeah, this document is just a survey that we have. It's one of the tools that we defined. With this survey, what we wanted is to try to understand how these specifically which dimensions have like a main role in the specific civic lab that we want to evaluate. Because another thing that we wanted is that these 7 dimensions, we not in every case we evaluate the 7 dimensions. We understand the civic innovation processes are I mean, are also unique in each case. So we have like these 7 dimensions as the complete framework, but for each case we need to define, okay, which are the specific dimensions that fits with the civic innovation process. And for that we have like this survey in which the coordination team of the civic lab and also we as evaluators need to respond. And with the data that we get from that, we can start a conversation with the coordination team. So we can say, okay, it seems that we are agree that this dimension is important, or this one is not, or we at Civimetro are thinking that this is important, and you are not. So we can start a discussion about that. And after with this, what we built is these diagrams that we have in the other bubble, this one and this one, with the connections between the dimensions, the objectives that we already defined in the first steps, and the activities that we wanted to evaluate. So with this visualization, it's like you have the whole view of what you want to evaluate. And also the Civic Lab has like the whole view or their own initiatives, and they can have like a deeply understanding of their own processes. So yeah, this is more or less. I don't know, Maje, if you want to, if I missed something.
No, well, I don't know if you already said that a dimension is like a work dynamic that usually take place in a civic innovation process or lab.
So my association is quite interesting hearing you talk about this, because as we sort of starting to speak, I was kind of scribbling a sort of process, and actually I think you probably explicitly or implicitly followed that. But my sort of first, sort of from an evaluation perspective, the first association I had was that sort of measuring the intangible. The intangible, I guess sometimes, if not often, is what we would call maybe the impacts of our work. So kind of the contribution that we're looking to make to a sort of a bigger phenomenon in our community or in our city or in our country that we're looking to achieve. So this could be gender equality, or it could be like increasing the levels of civic innovation. And that's quite these sort of impacts can be quite diffuse and sort of quite difficult to grasp. And so, yes, I think so. And I don't know whether others experience something similar. So it does pose a question, how we're going to look at those in evaluation terms, and indeed kind of pinning those down. And I don't know what you did, but I think we would often do this via looking at the literature, the wider literature from the scientific community or from other evaluators around or policy documents around a particular concept, to sort of understand how people are thinking about, in your case, civic innovation or sort of gender equality, how that sort of comes about. And speaking to the people who are running a project as well, kind of just to get their understanding, and then using that to build like a system which makes things more tangible, which is exactly what you've done, but sort of having a way of having a way of narrowing this down, making the intangible more concrete, breaking it down into chunks that we can then get data on, is absolutely the best thing and the right thing to do. I don't know, Julia or Sabrina, whether kind of you're struggling with similar things on similar things about, I don't know whether we call it intangible or impacts or.
Yes, actually, I would say that this division also with intangible things, as you were saying at the beginning, Pasquale, it's somehow hard to grasp, especially at the beginning, because some of them can be like foreseen, some others are not. And if you evaluate only at the end, they can be influenced by the atmosphere that you have at the moment. So if you don't give them the right grade, if you want to put it that way. And this is also something that, I would like to understand when you are starting with these type of questionnaires. Like, do you do them at the beginning? So based on that, you build the metrics and then you continue. Can you also revise them in the meanwhile? Like you have an iteration program on that part. Okay, that's great.
And then for me, the interesting aspects for me is, and I don't know whether you're dealing with this kind of, what do these areas tell us really about civic innovation, and do we have to have several of these in place in order to say, yes, there is that effect, or that, yes, there isn't? So there's something about also as using the process to sort of test the interactions between the different components of the phenomenon that we are exploring.
Yeah, for sure. Because if for example, we deliver a survey like this, and at the end, this coordination team of the Civic Lab responds with all the dimensions that the results are irrelevant. Like we can say, okay, maybe you are not trying to develop a civic innovation process. So it's also that way. And about and about what Julia was saying, we have when we process the data of the survey, we have like an internal measure. Like, okay, we say every aspect that have more than 3.5 is going to be considered as important, but it's not like a red line. Okay, if you have less or if you have more, it's just a tool to start the discussion and try to see what happens. I mean, it's just a tool to, okay, apparently if it makes sense, the results or not, for the Civic Lab and for us. And if there are some differences between the Civic Lab and us as evaluators. So it's just a tool to start this conversation, and it's a whole process that we are change it like 3 or 4 times. It's like, okay, at the beginning we have the results of the survey, and we see that, okay, maybe, I don't know, we have 4 or 5 dimensions of the 7, but we keep going, and through this process we are reviewing this like 3 or 4 more times, regarding, for example, which are the resources that the Civic Lab have to make the evaluation. Because, for example, if they don't have resources, maybe we have to scope a little bit more the evaluation. So we need to focus. We now have to focus on less dimensions and try to evaluate well. Okay, which are the really important dimensions that we want to evaluate? Maybe at the beginning it was 4 or 5, and at the end the evaluation is going to be 2 or 3. I don't know. So these kind of things are all the time reviewing and revisiting.
And then presumably you make that decision on the basis of is it, why are we evaluating, right? Do we want to learn about kind of which aspects of those, which dimensions are important, and so we sort of iterate around those, or do we focus on those maybe that are known already because we want to show particular significant change?
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah, and we also use one survey for one objective. I don't know if you can read it. Well, we use one form only per objective. Then the Civic Lab has to say which dimension, which work dynamics are important only for this objective. I don't know if I have say it. Yeah. Maybe you, Pascual, can redefine what I have said or what I wanted to say.
No, I think it's okay.
It's okay. Sorry. Well, I think in this diagram you can see, well, we link an activity with an objective and then with the dimensions. Well, it's in Spanish, but maybe you can have an idea.
Yeah, also with this diagram, going back again to this evaluation as a tool for design, with this diagram, we can start also a conversation about, okay, which are the most important objectives that the Civic Lab had. Because, okay, you can have 5 or 6 objectives, but maybe there are 2 or 3 that are like the main ones, like the big ones. And when we see these kind of diagrams, we can start a conversation about that also. And if we define which are those 2 or 3, also they can start to build that narrative. Okay, why are they doing what they're doing? And what are maybe that they could have, like I was saying, like 5, 6, but there are 2 or 3 are the main ones, are the ones that are building the narrative, are the biggest to propose that they want to communicate outside, and then you start to build your narrative from that point. So if you start to do all this process from the beginning, you can start to link, besides all the things that are happening, the changes that are happening, the failures, you can link it to a context of a narrative that you built from the beginning. So it's like you have control of that failure, you can say.
And what's interesting about those survey statements, I'm thinking about theory of change at the moment, actually, because it struck me, if you go back to those statements that you have, that embedded in those are, and I don't know how you develop them, but embedded in sort of each of those dimensions and each of those sort of subcategories are hypotheses about change, aren't there? So we need certain distributed management practices in place in order to achieve Y. So you could almost, you can see how from this data and even before, those organizations can build quite a substantial theory of change, which is quite sort of grounded in evidence. How did you come up with these categories? Did you use literature and interviews to define them, or?
No, it was we start we start with a list of 13 dimensions. This 13 dimension was based on, well, first, like our experience is in civic innovation processes, things, I mean, world dynamics that we saw that are important. And from that, we have also a couple of workshops with civic innovations stakeholders and people that are working in these kind of processes, and we give them these dimensions, the list, and also work with them, okay, which you find that are relevant or not. Do you think that they are clear or not? We also work on these aspects, on these statements with them. I mean, it was like a process of trying to iterate them, and also trying to visiting, like you were saying, like literature about civic innovation. Try to, okay, how people define civic innovation, how people talk about civic innovation. Let's see how could define this kind of world dynamics inside civic innovation. And it was like, it was it suffered a lot of changes through like 6-7 months. All these statements, and the list, so I was saying, it was like 13. Right now are 7. We merged some of them, we delete some of them. So it was like a process of trying to iterate the whole thing.
I think we are open to change it again.
Yeah.
I think we are now testing it, and if we found that one dimension doesn't work, we will change it, because we want that these dimensions have a strong link with the reality of the civic innovation.
So if we're just thinking back to kind of the first topic, we talked about kind of evaluation as a tool for design, and I talked about sort of evaluation purposes being sort of learning and outcome. Actually, another purpose of evaluation can often be knowledge generation. So actually, if you do have that dance between working with experience in this iteration with people who are working in this field, some link to literature, actually, if you use the evaluation data and link this more systematic data back to some writings of the scientific community, actually suddenly what often you get is very interesting stories that you can share with funders, for comms, for applications, that actually locate the innovation in the broader knowledge base of the field, which is often which people are often really interested in, and helps with funding bids and helps with all sorts of things. And we, of course, not the least, sort of refining the tools. So it's
sure,
useful.
It was also one of the things that we were discussing at the beginning. It was like we one of the purpose, it was like wanted Civimetro to be like a tool for civic labs to share knowledge, and to do that, these dimensions, it was like useful because you can have some things that you can link, so something that you can compare, but it's not fixed. I mean, it's not like always the 7 dimensions, so also is flexible to your own civic lab. So we wanted to try to balance between these two, like to have a fixed system of evaluation to be able to compare, but at the same time not to have a really fixed system evaluation that is going to makes you measure your civic lab in standards that maybe doesn't fit with your context or with your goals, with your objectives. So yeah.
I was curious to know because I mean, as you said, you've been working a lot in civic innovation and you were expert of the topic in this sense. I was curious to know from Sabrina, who I know, for example, is working a quite diverse team, right, of people, and and also to Julia. So how easy, if it was, how easy was it for you to define your project, as much as, for example, now Mahe and Pasquale try to define civic innovation labs and what they're doing? So you know what I mean? I don't know if I posed the question correctly, but somehow, is it hard or easy for you to actually say, to find this spot of your project or of your initiative and impact that you're trying to do, and say what exactly it is about, and as they are doing, for example, with civic innovation? Because in my mind, your projects are indeed, I don't have a name for them, a specific one. I know that there's this broad bubble of social innovation, and then everybody tackles it in different ways. And on one hand, you have entrepreneurial, but then you also have sustainability and also community resilience, for example. So I was wondering, how did you deal with all these different things and nuances of the impacts that you want to have?
In a way, I think that we didn't deal with that yet. We are just approaching it. And what is very interesting from the project that I'm now seeing is how they created a framework that can work with different projects with relatively minor adaptation. And that's really interesting, because right now what we did for Ticket Tour is only slightly oriented on social impact evaluation. Like, what is that social aspect that we are tackling? We know that since we are talking about entrepreneurship, there is also the economic value connected with it. We know that since we are talking about ecological type of entrepreneurship, there is a part of the environment that is connected, but we really didn't even start measuring on that. I think, but I might be totally wrong, that certain things can also be incremental. Like right now, Ticket Tour is focusing on starting that spark in the participant mind in starting an impact-driven career. If this happens, then measuring the economic and environmental aspect of those careers will make sense. Right now, I have the feeling that we are not there yet. And I wonder somehow, when is the right time to say, okay, from now on, I start measuring something, or when it's already too late and I lost track of data that I could have before. So this is a bit in my mind, but I don't have an answer for that.
And how about you, Sabrina?
I think my colleagues have the right answer to you, because in Lucca we start to learn how the project Star Park can improve, can work in a new city. The project was taught for Prato and now run in Lucca. I can see so that belief and knowledge of the citizen of Lucca are improved about social climate change, but I don't have the framework that I think my colleagues have, because they have just seen the project in Prato and then in Lucca, and have this experience that can give them the experience to how evaluate the impact. I don't. I don't know if my English is clear. I'm sorry.
Yeah. No. It's perfectly clear. Don't worry.
I think often. I think often when we look at impact, especially if that impact is sort of, as Julia said, sort of iterative, if it sort of kind of slowly unfolds in some ways, the only way really we have to do it is to either ask what we would call sort of a longitudinal study, so follow some people over a number of years or months and see and ask them, you know, similar questions and kind of see what happens. And if we don't have the time, we build, I guess, a model in a similar way as Pasquale have done, using what we know from the literature about sort of the process towards, from the activity that we're doing, from training or whatever. What do we know about the entrepreneurial journey in our context, a typical entrepreneurial journey? And then we can collect data up to the point when we have to stop, and we can kind of think about and make plausible assumptions about what we would call sort of distance traveled towards those impacts. So then kind of, you know, if what conventional wisdom is, if you're setting up, you know, people need X, Y, Z to become social entrepreneurs and make an environmental impact. You know, if we've achieved X and Y, then at this point when we're starting to evaluate, we can plausibly say that people are on a trajectory towards those impacts. But of course, it's sort of then things very easily get to the point when it's sort of quite difficult for us to control what happens. So yeah, those were my reflections on those challenges. Unless sort of there are other ways of doing something more immediate.
I think it's a good time to go to the third bubble. Sorry if my connection was lost, so I will not sharing the screen, but I will do it soon.
And it's also a good time to say that I have to run very abruptly in about 5 minutes. So my 3-year-old girl is not stranded by herself in nursery, which closes at 5:30. So.
Okay, well, I will explain this really quick, so maybe we can have some insights from Kirsten before she leaves. So for theory of change, which is in our case is the fourth step of the Civimetro system, of the Civimetro methodology. We have, well, first of all, this is like the last step that we test by now. So we have also a lot of questions about this. And we are trying to, first of all, trying to link theory of change to the dimensions of Civimetro, which are the ones that we were talking in the other bubble. So right now we are seeing like we are putting that intersection with Civimetro, those dimensions and those aspects that comes from that survey here, like inside between the objectives, which are linked with the dimensions, and the whole theory of change of the activity that we want to develop. And then when we try to start to doing a theory of change with Medialata Bacadera, like we put this like that. So okay, we have already defined our goals. We have identified the dimensions and the aspect that we want to that we think that are important to achieve those goals, and that we think that are important as world dynamics within the activity that we want to evaluate. And now we want to have identify all the items that define the whole process, like resources, outputs, outcomes, and impact. What we found is like it was really hard for them to think about within this structure. We can think that is a structure really simple. I mean, you can think, okay, outputs, outcomes, impact, resources. I understand every word, but when I try to think about a specific resources, a specific output of that activity, it was so hard because even for us, it was like, once they came up with something about their activity, it was like so hard to identify, okay, this is an output, this is an outcome, this is a resource, what is this? Where we put this item inside our theory of change. So it was so hard, and for them it was so hard to think within this structure. So for the second test, what we did, it was like, okay, we are not going to work with the theory of change. What we want to know are, we want to understand the whole process of the activity. We want to identify all the things, all the processes, all the items that conform the activity. And afterwards, if we have all that, we can build the theory of change by ourselves. We can identify and we can say, okay, this is an output, this is an outcome, this is a resource. But what we need is for them to put all that on the table. So we define this dynamic, and it's like an interview with them in which we start to ask them for all of this. Okay, which are the necessity that your activity is going to cover? Which are the phases that it has? Which are the physical resources, the digital resources? Which is the information? What are the information that you are going to build, that you are going to generate through the process? Which methods do you have? Which are the impact that you're trying to build? Also, these, for example, rituals or ceremonies, meetings that you are going to have in your activity. These are like a very deep interview with them on this activity, and we start to put all these things on the table. And then after that, the Civimetro team it takes care of putting all these items, all these things that we identify with the coordination team in a theory of change appearance. So for that, we are just in that point. So we have a lot of questions about this. We are not sure about how this is going to work, and we hope to test this with the initiative in Fuerteventura and to see, because the next step would be to define the indicators and to link it with the theory of change. And then after that, it comes the easy part, which is just to have the data collection and then the analysis. But the really, really hard part is to get to, I think the really hard part is to get to this point and trying like to have the whole frame defined. So yeah, that was like our experience trying to approach the theory of change.
Yeah, and I think that's a very common experience. So everybody who's Sabrina and Julie have experienced something similar. That's quite normal. It's hard for everybody to do that, surprisingly, considering the categories are so simple. Surprisingly, and the problem of where to put things doesn't go away. So it's the same challenge every time we do a theory of change. We're asking the same questions. Where does it go? Is it an outcome? Is it an impact? Is it an outcome? Is it an output? Is it an activity? We have to grapple with these things every time, and I think that's because every project, every activity, every initiative is different. And as we're working with this tool, we're developing our understanding of these categories and how things work. And that's why sort of and it's interesting to think about it, to tell your story. And I think that's totally an okay way to do it. I think a dear colleague recently departed always used to talk about theory of change as being like a journey or a process, being a sort of map. So it's not necessarily the visual output that counts. It's the process that people go through to develop a first version. That's what matters, because through that social learning process, and we create that social learning process because it works best when we do this theory of change together in a group with the people who are working, designing an intervention or evaluating it. Because we've got a dialogue and we can figure out how the different thing, what goes where, and crucially how things link together. And it's something that So in that sense, it's often the outcome, unless of course when you guys produce this, in which case kind of they always look beautiful. But it kind of often in my world, those things always often look very, very messy. And the more complex and the bigger an intervention is, the messier they get, because then you've got lots and lots and lots of information that you're trying to link. So that's why we also say it's the process, not necessarily the outcome, because the outcome takes a bit of while to sort of digest and make tangible for others. But the other thing that happens is that we would expect these theories of change to change. And the longer a project lasts, the more iteration this theory of change goes through. So it would probably look quite different at the end. And this is kind of where theory of change and outcome evaluation and process evaluation link back together. Because if you do a theory of change in a number of iterations, then actually, first of all, you're able to draw on your improving knowledge about what it is you're trying to do, why, and to what effect. To make the theory of change more tangible, but you're sort of also getting to an increasingly strong knowledge about what works and how we're going to achieve our outcomes. So these would be my reflections. And I don't know whether you backward map, so there are different techniques in which to do it. So sort of the normal way, I guess, to teach theory of change is that you start with kind of, I think, what you call objectives, and then so basically it's the context and the problem situation, and then you go to impact and see, so how are we going to change that problem, and then you look, okay, so what outcomes are going to help us, what active outputs, what activities. People find that sometimes quite hard to do that sort of backward mapping. So there's sort of ways around that as well, but I think the main thing, what I sometimes do as well, is give people think about prompts. So if you're facilitating a process like that, kind of a bit like you've done with interviewing, so you can interview and then you can feed some of that information back and allow people to play with it, because the trick, and their whole papers written about this, is not just to fill the boxes, but to create the links, the arrows between the different strands, because that's what's going to really articulate our hypotheses, our assumptions about why we're going to create the change that we're looking to create. And it's that why and information about the why that's really going to help us work with the issues that we talked about at the beginning, which is kind of how do we bridge, how do we communicate that learning, how do we communicate failure or change, how do we communicate with confidence, I guess, successes. It's that, what evaluators call black box, between what we do and what we get out. So the why, that theory of change really helps us articulate. So the arrows are incredibly important and sometimes quite easily forgotten. And it's also those arrows that we would expect to see change as the theory of change develops, because as we learn from our implementation practice, we are able to work out that our initial assumptions about what we would call causal pathways might not be correct, or that we get feedback loops, or that we get sort of diversions. And so we kind of can create more accurate causal pathways as we implement and as we collect the data on implementation.
I don't know, for example, Julia or Sabrina has experience.
And I'm really sorry, I really have to go because my daughter will be stranded. So I'm sure you have a great discussion in the last in the next minutes. If you're still here when I'm back, I will rejoin. So I will, in the meantime, take care.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you, Kerstin.
Yeah, for me, the theory of change is quite interesting. And at the same time, I was not really sure that you can actually iterate it. I was having in mind that it was a fix diagram that you keep in your mind every time you're lost and you come back to it, as is the Bible. And now actually understanding that you can reiterate it is something that I put in my notes because I was not sure about it. So it was super useful to see also this type of usage of it. I was feeling somehow that is something that you create at the beginning to understand where you're going, and then you just double check if you're on track. But understanding that can be reiterated is actually acquiring a total different like role in what I was thinking evaluation was.
Yeah. We didn't know either that we can iterate the things.
It was a discovery for everyone then. No, it's true. For me, it's always hard also to understand what are like the what is called like the dead weight. So basically those things that would have happened anyway with or without my project. And I actually think that's something that can only be measured when you do, I don't know, 700 iteration of the same project, and then you compare them and then you see if there was a common understanding of it. But that really becomes almost like some sort of social research per se, and it's actually become a full-time job. So I'm always in between these kind of things, because especially I guess that for you was the same, like talking about evaluation of impact to these associations that already have a lot of work to do can sound like an imposition. The more you ask, especially about detailed data, the more hard for them can be also to acquire them. So I guess you're struggling also with the demand that you have in their regards. So something to have in mind.
Sabrina,
I think your Canva is very, very interesting, but I have to study a lot and try to find how would design if I were you, so I can understand better. Non so se avete, okay, because I work in a hub of the city, and your work is very, very interesting. But I have to do it mine to understand better. But it's very, very interesting. I try to send you an answer and a question.
Yeah,
thank you very much.
Yeah, as we were saying, all these we are already like iterating on them. So all the feedback that you can you all can have on that is going to be really helpful for us. Also, like questions, trying to understand which doubts came up with these tools also is going to be really useful for us, I think. We have here in Miro in the first bubble, the making evaluation in a tool for design, there's this POSIT with a Miro link, which is like an online version of the guide as it is right now, with the first four steps of Civimetro and all the tools that we use for that. The bad news is that right now it's in Spanish, just in Spanish, but we're going to translate it, I hope, soon. But you can check also all this there, and I think in a more like organizing way of the tools. So.
Yeah, and I don't know, Pascual, if you have already said it, but I think this tool was very useful because they just had to talk. Well, they didn't have to write anything. They just had to talk about the project. And we were, well, Civimetro team we were asking, one of us were asking, and the other one was taking notes of what they were saying. And I think that that was that was the key, I think, because the first time we tried to use the theory of change, we have asked them to write down all these resources, outputs and outcomes, impact, and all these things, but they are not designers and they don't think in this with this structured mind, and they couldn't do it. Well, they didn't understand what we wanted.
Yeah, actually, connected with this, I have a question. Like, how do you imagine that this, let's call it methodology to measure impact will be used by users? Like, it will be in his final stage, like when it's completed and whatever. It's going to be something that they do by themselves. It's going to be organizing workshop. It's going to be an app in which you insert your things or a questionnaire. Do you have an idea about that?
Yeah, we well, what we have in mind is that people, users can use it by themselves, and also that's why we are already like sharing all the tools and everything, like in this case in Miro, is for people to use it and also to have the feedback, also to try to iterate better. We understand that right now it's so hard for that to happen because like you have to understand the whole process and the tools and everything. So, well, in fact, right now it's not happening. But well, we have a little surprise at the beginning of this. Well, at the end of last year, like we had an email from Mexico of the Tech, the university, that they were trying to implement Civimetro in a city by themselves, and they run like the first like 3 steps, something like that, and they get stuck, and they were like, okay, we need your help. But they tried to do like the first 3 steps, and we were like really happy, like, okay, there's people trying to do it. It can work, but right now it's just the only experience that we had regarding that. And also what we are imagining is like, and we already are working on that with another initiative in Bilbao, is trying to build like a small version of Civimetro, like a really small version of Civimetro with like some few tools that you can use to try to evaluate your civic innovation process, like but in a very light way. And so small initiatives and small stakeholders that wanted to use it and doesn't have so much resources, time, and people to put on that, could try to start to use Civimetro. And then after, to have the big version of Civimetro. Okay, if you want, you can just keep it with the small version, but if you want, you can jump into the big one and do it like the whole process from the beginning to the end, like trying to define your objectives, dimensions, and blah blah blah, theory of change, and so on. So right now we are thinking on that.
Cool.
Yeah, I'm looking at the time now, and we promised 6:30. But if there is some last questions. I hope you found this conversation useful, and that it sparked something and useful for your projects and thoughts. And yeah, I think also on our side, it's been really nice to make it really collaborative and to learn a lot. For me personally, also to learn really a lot about evaluation. So thanks to Pasquale and Maher. And also thanks everybody for coming. As always, we will collect the recordings, collect the slides. We'll probably now with you guys, we can agree on what's the best format to also make these tools or templates accessible, even more accessible, so that we can share maybe with all the others who could not join. so that the testing goes on and the sharing is also continuing. And yeah, I think it's also from our side. Thanks again for being here today with us.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Bye. Bye.
Bye bye.
Bye. Thank
Bye
you.
bye.
Bye.